Might be called a Nomad, but right now it's a no-go. Hello my friends, and welcome to Tom's Tinkering and Adventures. Today we're going to be working on this 2006 Kawasaki Vulcan 1600 Nomad, which I picked up about 3 miles away from my house here. I purchased this as a project. It's not running. The owners that I got it from bought it at an auction and they never had it running. So I do not have any real history on this bike as to what happened to it, at least going off the story I got. And you just never know if the previous owners possibly had an issue with it and didn't tell me. I mean, you never can tell if people are being honest. But I got what I think is a fair deal on it, and I, of course, go into these things optimistic, but the last project I bought like this, it turned out to be a little bit more than I hoped. So we'll see. Look at the sun is killing me here. Sorry about that. We'll see if it pans out. But we'll take a quick look at it here before we get started on it. And in all fairness and honesty for my videos, I've already started doing some stuff on this because I just have a hard time controlling myself, but I will go back to square one and show you what I've done at the very least. So it is a pretty complete bike in not too bad a shape. It's going to need some cleaning up, like we get the hazy windshield. Tank is in decent shape, seats are in okay shape. The biggest negative on this bike is this saddlebag. It's got some damage here. It almost looks like something was dropped on top of it, because I don't see a lot of damage on the side of it here. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that, but that's a cosmetic issue that we'll get to later. We also have a little missing button here on the speedometer. Of course, you can't purchase these buttons separately. I've already looked at that, so we'll have to figure that out as we go. Nice, great big, geez, look at the size of this backrest. This bike is ridiculously heavy. I'm guessing it's got to be right around 800 pounds. I haven't looked up the specs on it yet. I've got the side covers, and it's just dirty. It's been sitting outside for a while, so we will worry about that later. I will get you set up here, take the seats off of here, and maybe even the tank, and I'll show you what's going on with it. The folks I purchased this from handed me this with the purchase. They said they changed out the fuel pump because they thought the fuel pump was the problem. Here, I was going to set you in the stand, but we will turn the key on, and you cannot hear the fuel pump turning. I'll go down here. No fuel pump. As I cycle the key on and off, you can hear, let me turn you upside down here, there's the fuel pump relay. You hear it clicking there. So the fuel pump relay clicks. Fuel pump is not cycling. This is the leads to the fuel pump. And I will show you, I tested the fuel pump and it works. I'll show you that in a minute. We do have power on. Well, I think that's it says coolant, fuel injection, oil. I think that's all-in-one light, I'm guessing. That just says, probably it's oil at this point. And there is a way to read codes on here somehow, and I haven't done it yet. But I'll show you that she cranks over. Okay, so I initially thought that perhaps I'd get lucky and there was just a wiring issue with the fuel pump, and I have already done it. I've sprayed some fuel carburetor cleaner, both of them in here. Took the cover off, sprayed them into the intake, didn't get any fire. I then checked to see if I had spark. I didn't see any spark. We will check that again here because the battery was kind of low, and doing some reading online told me that a low battery could cause low spark. Okay, so I'll show you how to test this fuel pump so I can prove to you that it works. All right, so what I've done is I've unplugged the fuel pump plug here, and I've hooked up, this orange wire is hooked up to the yellow and red, which is the positive, and this black wire is hooked up to the blue one, which is the negative. And hopefully I have these connections good enough here. We'll see if it stays in there, and you can hear it cycling as I touch this orange one to the positive. So we do have fuel pump operational. Okay, I've darkened things up a little bit in the garage here so we can see if we have spark. I've tested this and I didn't notice any, but maybe when it's dark we'll see if we have some. Okay, I don't see any spark. Get you in even closer here. All right, so no fuel, no spark, no go. Okay, so at this point, we've determined we do not have fuel, we do not have spark. Now an engine cannot run. Well, heck, can't run with one, without one or without the other. We have neither. And we're not worried about anything else at this point. We could do compression checks and all that sort of stuff, but without fuel, without spark, none of that's really gonna matter. The next thing that I did at this point was I checked, since we already know that the fuel pump works, I checked to see if we were getting voltage here. Remember, we could hear this relay clicking, which is supposed to, when you turn the key on, it's supposed to send voltage up to the fuel pump. I wasn't able to read only about 0.4 volts through here. So the next thing we're going to do is I will show you how to perform the test on this relay. There we go. There's my usual RTFM. Read the freaking manual. Here's our DFI, which is a, I don't know what the D stands, fuel injection system. Relay inspection. This is called the main relay, so I don't know what else it all controls, but I do know it controls the fuel pump. So we're supposed to hook up a multimeter. We put voltage to terminals 1 and 2, which then completes that circuit, and it should close 3 to 4. So without voltage hooked up, we should have no reading. And when you hook voltage up, we should have continuity, which means that the meter should make the noise. Continuity means that you have a camera that's falling over, but you have a closed circuit, which I have this thing set on audible so you can hear it. Now here we can hook up the relay. I've got it wired. Let's listen to it. You can hear it cycling. Right now we should have no continuity between the other two terminals on here, so it should be an open circuit, so no noise. And then when we make the noise, which I have got it hooked up right now, it should be reading continuity. And we have none, so that means that no voltage is going to the fuel pump. You turn the key on, the voltage is going through here, but we're not getting anything to the fuel pump. So I got this bike actually a couple days ago, and like I said, I've already started on this, and thank you to good old Scamazon. I typed in that number that is on this relay here. You could order it from Kawasaki for about 30 bucks, which isn't terrible, but I have a alternate one here. It's the same, so we will test this one. Here's a new relay. Let's test it out. Listen to the click. Okay. Got the good click. Now, let's see if we have continuity through these two. And we certainly do. So we've already identified one item that was wrong. I don't know as if that's going to do anything for our ignition problem, but let's install it and find out. Okay, at this point we are at new territory because I just got that. I just got that in. that solenoid. So we installed it. It actually went on there a little bit tight. I looked at it, and these indentations, or whatever you want to call them here, are just slightly different on this off-brand one. But we'll give her a shot. Let me move you over to this side. See if we can hear that fuel pump priming. And of course, before we do anything, I gotta hook it back up. That would be funny. No, it's not doing anything, but it's not hooked up. I've got the battery charging right now. It seemed like it was turning it over fine, but I did a little bit of reading on some Vulcan forums, and they said that a weak battery, even though it's cranking it over, could cause spark issues. So let's see if we can hear this fuel pump now. I still don't hear it, but that doesn't really mean anything, because it might be primed already. So what we're going to do next now is we will test to see if we have voltage reaching us here. Okay, so even though we tested that one and it had no voltage or no continuity going through it, when I was testing this the other day, I told you I was getting a little bit of voltage up here. And now, well, you heard it when it was on the bench. You can barely, here, I'm gonna tip you upside down, or here, I'll hold you down this way. Get the key on. You can just barely hear that thing clicking, so I don't know what's going on. When I run a voltage test up here, with the key on, I should be getting 12 volts out of this, but I'm getting less than 1 volt, half a volt approximately. And then I'm going to go down here and test these leads. So this one's coming out, the white and the red. So the yellow and the red is the input. So we'll probe that one. So we're probed there, and we're getting 12 volts. But for some reason, this thing is not switching over enough to give us 12 volts through it. This other one here is the voltage when the key is on, right here. And that's also 12 volts. But going through it, let's see, so that's the back side of it. We're getting less than 1 volt. So it should be, in my opinion, it should be 12 volts going through on this black and yellow wire. So I don't know why we're not getting a solid voltage through here. I'm doing a little bit of research once again, like I said, on the Vulcan forums. This right here is a ground terminal. So some people have said that this creates bad grounds, which can lead to issues such as this. So I would think if we had a bad ground, that could cause all kinds of issues. Now there's one other thing I would like to check. Even though this bike doesn't have any signs of a tip over, it may have tipped over. Like I looked on the edge here, I don't see damage here, even though we've got that saddlebag broken and this turn signal broken. I don't see damage along the side here to show that this bike has been tipped over. That seems odd, because if you tipped over on the side, there'd be more damage here. I don't see anything leading me to believe it has a tip over on this side either, but there is a tip over sensor up under the tank. So I think I will test that next. That would also lead to no fuel. I don't know if it would lead to no spark, but we can pull that out and test it next. In another plug for RTFM, read the freaking manual. The manual has some really good troubleshooting here. It goes step by step for everything. So, you know, I already started on it before I was reading the manual, but you know, it said if we don't have proper voltage at the fuel pump, that this is actually the next thing to go to. So maybe my intuition is just about as good as the manual, but you know what? If you don't have great intuition, but you have a manual, please utilize it. This one is really good. You do have to know a little bit about reading a meter and finding these items, but this tells how to read the vehicle down sensor. And you have to remove the tank, and it's buried underneath here. So I'm gonna pull, yeah, where the hell is it? Yeah, it's under here somewhere, right there. It's kind of buried in there. I'm gonna dig that out and then we'll do the test on it. Well, in an interesting development, I removed the sensor here. In order to read it, I had to strip a little bit of insulation off the wires since I don't have an inductive reader. And I plugged everything back in, and now you can hear the fuel injection system working. But we still don't have fire. Now it ain't working. It worked every other time. I cycled it off and on before the key. I see we have a little FI staying on here, which maybe is good, bad, otherwise, I don't know. Let's try, see, I just kind of moved this thing a little bit. It's supposed to be at a certain angle for it to operate. There, look at that. The fuel smells terrible. Well, let's see if we have spark now. What the hell? I just grabbed an old spark plug that I had laying around here. Okay, I still don't see any spark. There's our cycling on the fuel. So we know the fuel pump's working. Still don't see any spark. And this thing is odd. It doesn't work every time. So that leads me to believe that that sensor is a little bit wonky. I wonder if there's a way I could just bypass this thing. I mean, obviously that's not the smartest thing to do, but if I bypassed it, it would definitely be sure to always be operating. I don't know if you can hear it. It must have like a little thing in there that only reads it. Like if it tips all the way over, the bike tips all the way over, it shuts the fuel off. I don't know if it shuts the ignition off or not. It definitely shuts the fuel off. That's interesting. It's working now. Yeah, look at that, not working. It's almost like this switch is I don't know. And the FI light goes on and then it goes out in here. See, it's back on. It's good news though. We're making some progress. Okay, so after messing around with this thing a little bit, now I have nothing. I can't get it to work at all. And when I first pulled it off and was messing around with it and I got the fuel pump to work, I ran the voltage tests on it. So there's a source voltage. Let me bring you over here. You're supposed to check that you have voltage between the brown and the black and yellow should be 12.5 when you turn the key on. And I don't have source voltage now. So now I'm going to look up this DFI power source voltage. But also, when the fuel pump was working, I did this voltage test here. It says when you tilt the sensor, you should have 3.7 to 4.4, and with the sensor arrow mark pointed up, you should have less voltage, 1.4. And I was getting the exact opposite readings of that. Basically, it was reading high voltage with it up and low voltage with it tilted. So that's odd. I don't know why it's doing that, but I guess I will look up DFI power source and see where we're at on that. And all this is leading me to believe that we have a poor ground somewhere in the system. And like I said, I've done a little bit of research on this bike. Some people point to this ignition switch that sometimes it gets a bad connection inside of here. So that's a suspected item, along with this mess here. I just thought it was funny how that fuel pump just started to work just from messing around with this. But now I have nothing over here as far as the correct voltage. The funny thing is, remember how the fuel injection light was on before, and now it goes out. And when you crank, that light goes out. But when the fuel pump was working, we had the FI lit up on here, and that light kind of flashed a little bit. So I think if we can get this operating properly over here, we can start to troubleshoot, but right now we can't because we're just not, something isn't right. Back to the manual here, we have DFI power source. It says to read this DFI main fuse here. Check it, of course it's not blown. And then of course we're going to the main relay, which we've already done. And this shows us all of our power source following from the battery. This is through that main fuse that's on there, through the ignition switch, down to that V is the DFI relay. And then over to our, the DFI fuse, then over to our relay, which then feeds over to all the other stuff that we've already been playing with. So, I have already been playing with this a little bit. We're set to voltage. We have on our DFI fuse here 12.3 volts, which is where our current battery is at. You can check that right here. 12.3. So we're getting 12.3 straight through to this fuse. Now, when I turn the key on, no fuel injection sound. And we're probing this, and we are down to 1.5 volts. So that's telling me that we have something which is drawing a bunch of current, which could be a bad ground. It could be a poor contact in this switch. Looking at this, of course, before we get to that, it is going through the ignition switch. So I am going to take this switch off and take it apart. I'm probably also gonna, this one sounds good, but we'll check that one as well. And we'll see if there's some bad contacts in there. All right, we got this thing removed. If you ever have to take one of these off, the screws are almost always Loctited in there, so make sure you put a little bit of heat. I used my heat gun for about 30 seconds, and they came loose. Otherwise, you'll strip them out. On many models, the bolts are anti-tampering, so you can't really use a tool, so you have to grind them off or drill the heads off, which is okay because if you just grind the head off, you can pull it off and you'll have that much of the stud sticking out, and you can just grab it with a vice grip and turn it out, and then just put a regular screw back in there. But these were just Allen head bolts. Got it out. Now here's Tom's Tinkering and Adventures pro tip for the day. These things have springs and little detent balls and all kinds of goody bits in there. So I like to put it in a clear plastic bag and take it apart. That way if things go flying, they're inside of the bag and you can find them. Might be a pain in the ass to try to work in there, but I've already loosened these screws up, so I'll get a small, short screwdriver. We'll take it apart. This bike, well, it's 2006, so it's 13 years old, so there might be some corrosion in here, which could be leading to our voltage drop, you know, a bad connection or a bad ground. We'll figure it out. I'll take this apart and I'll show you inside of it. Okay, so there's our little plates on here, and when you turn the key, these rotate and they make connection between these. They're not in perfect shape, but we will clean that up a little bit. You can use some light sandpaper, some emery cloth, some steel wool, a pencil eraser, whatever you want. So I'm going to clean those connections up and we'll put this back together. There's a little bit of corrosion, but it's not in terrible shape. But we might as well eliminate this first and foremost. But that's really all that this thing does. When you turn the key, these are spring loaded. That's the springs underneath there. And those little plates go from like this connection to, so connecting these two to connecting these three, and connecting that one to connecting those two, or whatever. Those look a little bit better. So I'm going to put just a tiny dab of dielectric grease and we'll reassemble this and see what happens. Okay, we reinstalled it. I've already ran it up. There's been no change. I got to thinking, when I removed the tank so that we could take this vehicle down sensor out, I also kind of like ran my hand along the main wiring harness, and possibly there is a short in that somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to maybe set this tank on something next to here so I could hook up the fuel pump, and then I'm going to mess with the wiring harness. Or actually, I probably don't even need to. I can just check that fuse. So I'm going to do that, take the tank off, and then mess with the wiring harness. Maybe there's a short in the wiring harness somewhere. Electrical troubleshooting can be a real pain sometimes. You have to be very methodical, or you know, at least just start experimenting with things. So what I did, since we know that when we installed that thing, or when we removed it and brought it over here, we kind of got the fuel pump to work. And we were reading out here voltage. Let's see if we can get it. 12 volts, and then we would turn the key on and it would drop down. So I removed that fuel pump relay, turn the key on, and now we have 12 volts. But we know that we tested that relay and it was good. And then I'm back up here reading the source voltage up here, even with this thing disconnected. Let's see, source voltage should be the brown one, and I'm only getting 0.58 volts. So something tells me that we're not getting the correct source voltage into here, which then feeds this back and into the relay. In fact, I will test that by having this disconnected and plug the relay in and see if the relay cycles. I'll do that. And if that's the case, then we got to find out why we're not getting 12 volts up to here. So I'm going to have to track down where that brown wire comes from. Well, I got to be honest, this thing is pretty frustrating. I've been chasing wires around, reading the wiring diagram, trying to figure out what is going on with this thing. You know, we did have a little bit of fuel pump action, but now I have none. Haven't had any since that time. Messed around with this fella here. This side up, there you go. So I messed around with that, and as you remember, this thing was reading out. I could swap it out, but now I don't even have the 12 volt source voltage up here anymore. I was reading out the ECU, and we were getting a little bit of what I thought was wires shorting out between this brown and yellow one and this light green one. And then I was also reading over here, let's see, this red and brown one would read to continuity to ground, but as soon as you turn the key on, then you would lose that. I don't know, this is pretty frustrating. As soon as you turn the key on, this voltage drops at this thing. Actually on both of these, because this one here, this is our live one to the fuel pump, so that's live all the time until the relay is energized. So that one, let's see if we can get a good ground on it. So that one we have 12.65, and when you turn the key on, that thing, of course the relay should cycle, and then 12 should go to the other side, but what happens is, let me see if I can run this switch with one hand. Our voltage drops. And that's telling me we got resistance somewhere. And I've removed everything out of here. You know, I've had the fuel pump plugged in, unplugged. I've unplugged everything that I could think of. But for some reason, we're getting a big drop in voltage. It doesn't matter if I disconnect this. I've disconnected the tip over sensor. Even with that disconnected, the voltage drop is still the same. Now I also get a voltage drop on this side, which is the key side. Let me switch this out. So when I turn the key on, I should be getting 12 volts there. Actually, I'm getting 12 volts there, but what's happening is on the other side of it, it's dropping down to less than a volt. And I would think going through that relay shouldn't reduce voltage that much. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the story is there. I'm reading resistance. Not really getting resistance on it. That's just to open. So I don't have a short to ground on it. I guess I'm not really reading resistance, but I don't have a short to ground on that side. When I shut the key off, this side shorts to ground. Let's see if we can get a good reading. There we go. I need to get this in here better. But I think that has to do with the whole system of this. When you shut this off, it closes a ground to shut the engine off. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. As soon as I turn this on, as soon as I turn the key on again, then that continuity is gone and we're open. So yeah, let's check this side here. Yeah, we're open there as well. Well, if anyone has any advice for me, I would appreciate it. I don't know which direction to go here. I'm just gonna keep doing some digging around. I mean, this thing obviously did work for a second. The fuel pump at least did. So something tells me we have some wiring issues somewhere, or just something funky somewhere. And I don't know where. But this video is gonna get awful long if I keep going, so I'm gonna break it up and we'll come back and do a little bit more troubleshooting on this thing later. But I appreciate y'all hanging out here and working on this with me. If you're digging what I'm putting out, give me a thumbs up, dirty thumbs up even. Leave a comment down below, and if you're not already, please consider being a subscriber. I like to see my numbers growing. It helps keep me motivated to try to work on projects and learn something myself, and hopefully y'all are learning something out there in YouTube world as well. Thank you very much for watching. Get out there and find your adventure. Adios. This damn thing. As soon as I stopped the video, I was putting it back together and it made the fuel pump work again. So I don't know what the heck to do, but this is odd. We'll see you on the next one.